Okay, I've unmuted myself. Good morning. Can everybody hear? Go ahead and give us a text chat if you can hear.
Lori says good morning.
Okay, excellent. They can hear. Okay, I'll have you, Liza, open the meeting.
Okay. Welcome, everybody, to our in-between database committee meeting.
The red arrow there.
Oh, I was going to have Liza read the attendees off.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Typically, we like to do that.
And I butcher everybody's names.
That's part of the fun.
Better you than me.
Those of us in the room, I'm Liza Hickey, Peoria Public Library Database Committee Chair.
We'll jump to you, Lisa.
Lisa Shabansky, RSA.
Kendall Orison, your chat monitor.
Erica Laughlin, RSA.
And online, we have Abby Miles,
Brimfield Public Library.
Amy Gould,
Kewanee Public Library.
Ann Reeves,
Eureka Public Library.
Beth Guttlinger,
William Evans Library District.
Bobby Mock,
Quincy Public Library.
Aaron Roberts,
Illinois Prairie District Public Library.
Heidi Ray.
I think Ray. Correct us if we're wrong. Ray. Alpha Park Public Library.
Jane Bradbury.
Here at RSA.
Oh, yep, sorry. Janine Moonen.
Normal Public Library.
Jean Thomas.
Farmington Public Library.
Joanne Heilman.
Pekin Public Library.
Joyce Carmack.
Martin Township Public Library.
Julia Kozad-Callanan.
Normal Public Library.
Lori Haller.
Washington District Library.
Megan Rowe.
Galesburg Public Library.
Nancy Turpening.
Galesburg Public Library.
And Rhonda from RSA.
Uh-huh.
Robin Hellenthal, Peoria Public Library.
You know that one.
Chantry Miller.
Blessing Health Professions Library. You probably are healthy there. So.
Tracy Carroll, Pekin Public Library.
Exactly. Yep.
And I always get your name wrong. Uzma
Salat.
Salat.
Is that correct, Uzma? Normal Public Library. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Great. Got my recording going. We'll collapse the window. Okay. Like most meetings, we have on the RSA website, rsanfp.com, we have under the RSA board committees groups, and then the DB management, database management committee, and then we have the agenda for today. I almost wonder, let's do a new tab. Okay. I was hoping to keep that open. Oops. And then a few housekeeping items. We do plan to take notes during the meeting. That would be Lisa from the RSA team doing that. We're also recording this meeting, and the idea is we think that we'll make both the recording and the notes available on the listserv at the same time, so watch in the next couple weeks. If you have a microphone and you'd like to ask a question, this is the part Kendall will help me keep an eye on. I was thinking that you could either type in the text chat or notice next to your name there should be a little raise hand button. I was thinking either let us know with the raised hand or just a simple text chat that you'd like us to unmute you to ask your question or make a comment if that would be easier. Let's see, I think that's all of the housekeeping. And then we have a few documents at the bottom of the page that we'll take a look at here. Okay. So going to number 2 here, there's a few things about the Cataloging Maintenance Center I ran out of time to tell you at the January 24th database meeting, and some of these actually I've just learned within the past week, so this is good timing. They just announced, and you might have seen these, I know they were mentioned in the Rails e-newsletter, but the CMC has announced that they've scheduled additional monthly webinars starting next month. No, starting in April. Yeah, they'll take next month. Oh, no, wait, this is March. So it is next month. Wow, woohoo, we're going towards warmer weather. So it would be next month then in April. And then they've scheduled a monthly webinar all the way through January 2020. So they're all posted on L2, but I made a list here. I was going to show you just all of the topics. Yeah, that should be it. Let's see if we can. Okay, I'll collapse that. I know some of you have attended the CMC webinars they've done each month so far on different topics. I know we saw Lori and Nancy. We've seen some of you at these webinars. That's great that you're attending them. So notice they've got lots of topics coming on different mark fields, genre headings, tips to determine a local author, details about series, subject analysis, kit cataloging, foreign language, rare books. So these are all coming, and they are posted on L2. The other thing I wanted to show you is also posted on L2. Again, you might have seen this mentioned in a newsletter, but the CMC is also starting to teach 6-week courses. Right now it's copy cataloging, so there's 2 courses, one on books and then one on sound and video recordings. These are taught by Pamela Thomas at Illinois Heartland Library System. You might remember Pam. She used to be the Library Technical Services Associate professor and the manager of technical services at the Illinois Central College Library here in East Peoria. So this is a really good fit for her because she was doing cataloging instruction there. And now she's starting up these 6-week courses that can be taken by anybody across the state. And they are free. That's a good point, Liza. Yeah. The deadline was really tight for the RDA book course that she's starting this Monday, March 4th. So I admit she shared it with me, but I was out of the office a couple days and did not see. But it was a very narrow window to register for that course because this is something they just got up and running. But they do have them scheduled, though, over the next few months. So I wanted to be sure and show you here in April. Yeah, here's the next RDA video and audio recording. Yeah, do you mean, Lori, the training courses, or do you mean the online with the CMC webinars? I know with these training courses, I asked Pam how it would work. Yeah, okay. Good question. I did ask Pam how it would work because I knew that there may be some questions about it. So it lasts 6 weeks. It's asynchronous. So you log into their Moodle online platform that Illinois Heartland hosts, and then she has a combination of articles, chapters, documents to read, and she also has pre-recorded video lectures. I don't know about the length. I just know each week Pam was saying that you log into Moodle, you do the lessons for that week at a time that works best for you, so you don't have to log in at a certain day or time. It's called asynchronous since you do it on your own time. And then each week after you do the lesson, which remember is a combination of documents and videos, she said that there's homework and then there's also quizzes to make sure you're understanding the content. And then when you complete the 6-week course, you get a certificate of completion. They recommend that you take the RDA book training course first, especially if you're not, how do I word this? They want you to have a working familiarity of cataloging. You can't be brand new to it and know nothing, but I do think it would be a good idea to take the book one first if you can, because that probably lays the groundwork for what she covers in the video and audio recording one. I do think though, if you're feeling comfortable with books and you'd like to go ahead and try the video and audio recording, I don't think it would hurt to sign up, but their recommendation is to do the book one first. So these, like I said, these are a great resource, and like Liza said, they are free and they're open to anybody. They do close the registration a week before because there's quite a bit of setup involved when you're teaching an online course. So she really wants to be able to prepare. So just be mindful of the registration deadlines. One thing that we will do here on our end with the cataloging team, we plan to share reminders on the RSA listserv about these training courses and then also the monthly CMC webinars. That way it's another nudge. I know it's difficult to remember all the events coming up, so just watch the listserv too. We'll try to remind you a little bit closer.
It doesn't say on there, but is there a limit to the number of participants for these two?
Oh, that's a good question. I am not sure if, does it say on there and I'm not seeing
read
it?
through it.
It should say, if there is, there should be a link on there that says, max number of participants.
Yeah, we think, I don't see it mentioned here, but I do know though, Pam here, her contact information is at the bottom. She's been very receptive to the questions I've asked so far, so I'm thinking she could answer that too. Yeah, that's a good question though. I'm hoping since Moodle is I remember using that in college for online courses. I'm hoping it can take a hefty number of, but it depends though too on how many she wants to have.
That's true. Homework she has to
exactly.
1,000.
Right. So there probably is a limit now that I'm saying that and thinking, but it has the potential to have a lot of people, but whether or not she wants it that way is another story. Okay, just a couple other details before we move forward about those training courses. A lot of this I've already mentioned. Oh, I did just want to chime in, and this is what Pam and I were talking about, but she's going to be emphasizing the resource description and access, the RDA cataloging rules. She's not going to be emphasizing procedures for consortia like RSA or Illinois Heartland. They have SHARE. She's trying not to cover procedures specific to consortia, and she's also not going to be focusing on OCLC. She's mostly, she said, going to be using work forms and just really focusing on the RDA rules so that you understand the description on the records. I do think if you take the courses and you have questions about how RDA is, I don't want to say entered, but the choices we make about RDA description in our database, it never hurts to contact first if you're at a library like Peoria or Normal and you have a cataloging team. It never hurts to check with each other on your team. But if it's pretty much just you at the library doing cataloging and you're wondering, okay, I'm learning quite a bit in this course. I wonder if this particular detail applies to what I'm doing in RSA. You can always contact our help desk if you have a question about what you're learning. and trying to relate it back to how it applies to the RSA database. But I do think at some of our larger libraries like Normal and Peoria, Galesburg, Quincy, you may be able to collaborate with your team too to know what you're doing. Okay. Something else I wanted to mention about the Cataloging Maintenance Center, they do have, and you might have discovered this if you've attended their monthly online with the CMC webinars, but they have a playlist on the Illinois Heartland Library Systems YouTube channel that's all of those archived CMC webinars they've been doing monthly. So notice here it is.
My name is Pamela Tom.
And it starts to play right away, but that's good. You know it works. But again, that's a great resource, especially if you've missed one of those CMC webinars that they've done already. They've been doing these maybe a year or so. Okay, this I did mention at the last database meeting, but remember the CMC, they are joining us for RSA Day on March 20th at the Peoria Public Library main branch. We're excited to have them join us again. I know they're trying to do more outreach and really get the word out about what they're doing. So if you're going to RSA Day, feel free. I know the CMC is doing breakout sessions. Feel free to stop by and say hi to them, and then I'm sure that they'll have some interesting tidbits to share about what they've been working on. I plan to also have Jane Bradbury, the newest member of our cataloging team. She'll be in the CMC session as well, encouraging anyone who attends that session if they'd like a brief record report that shows potential items that are local history, genealogy, or special collections. That's a project that Rhonda on our team used to do, but we're transitioning that to Jane. So that's another perk if you'd like to attend the CMC breakout session and ask Jane for a report. You can do that too, of course, without attending the CMC breakout session, but it'll be a good opportunity to meet Jane and then, like I said, also interact with the CMC staff. Okay. I've got two other details. These are the ones I learned just in the past week or so. If you get the items back from the CMC, but you can't find their records and workflows, that is probably due to me and my backlog. I think I've caught up actually with loading all of these CMC records. I think I'm caught up at this point. But if you can't find the records, just reach out to me directly, either email or phone. The phone really helps because it gets my attention in the mess of email. But the CMC staff, they don't actually load the records into our database. So that's an important detail to keep in mind, is if the records aren't in there when you start to get ready to put the item in, let me know rather than the CMC, because I know that's caused confusion on their end. The other detail, and this just came up, I wanted to show an example of this in workflows. Both the Macomb Public Library and the Washington District Library, you recently submitted volumes from a multi-volume set. Here's the one the Washington District Library submitted. I was glad that you submitted this, Lori, because I actually had been wondering about how the CMC did this, and the Macomb Public Library book encouraged me to ask for clarification, but I saw it first with what you submitted. So there is a record in our database for this Bill Adams Yesterday's title. I call it a multi-part record because notice it has ISBNs for all 3 volumes. In the description, the 300 field, it says it's all 3 volumes. Remember, our best practice is to try and catalog each volume on its own bibliographic record. This isn't wrong. I think if your library makes the choice to do this, that's okay. we really want to make sure if we're attaching all 3 volumes with separate barcodes to a record like this that describes the set as a whole, we want to make sure we have those pipe Zs and the call number. That way patrons in the RSA CAT can put specific copy level holds. Otherwise, they'll get the first volume and it may not be volume 1. So that's okay, but what we're trying to move towards in our best practices is, remember, trying to use separate volume records. And I noticed with this title, that's exactly what Washington did. It looked like here, this record, Pam actually at the CMC created, and notice it just describes volume 1. And then notice how easy that is to tell what you're getting. It's just one item attached, just Washington's. And then here's volume 2. So again, the same idea. It'll make it easier for holds. And then it also has a richer description since it's just describing one volume rather than all 3. But the CMC will make those single part records rather than the multi-part records. They'll do either, actually, depending on the preference. So if you do submit multiple volumes of a set, it may not hurt to tell the CMC that you'd like them to do, again, depending on what you've decided at your library, if you want them to do a multi-part record or if you want them to do single part records. Okay, any questions about that before we push on to the EResource policy? Okay. I know I mentioned in the listserv post the scope of today's discussion, but I thought we'd review that before we get started. So we're not voting to approve this today. I thought we could talk about questions we've gotten about the policy, if you have additional thoughts and questions. Today is more of a discussion day. And then the next step would be, I'd like to have this policy revised, ideally a week or 2 at the latest before the May 9th database meeting so that we can share it on the RSA listserv. You can look it over and then we'll review the revisions at the May 9th database meeting, and then we'll try to get approval for it on May 9th so that we can push it forward then to the board and the users group at their August meetings. Okay, remember, if you want to use your microphone, just give us a hands up or type in the text chat. Okay, so the first question we've gotten about the EResource policy since we drafted the first stab at it, as I call it, last September, was the possibility of submitting an electronic resource to the Cataloging Maintenance Center to create an OCLC record for it. This was suggested by you, Chantry. Chantry's on the call at the Blessing Health Professions Library. They have theses there that are written by members of their faculty, students, different people associated with the college. They're not going to do print versions anymore, but they are going to have electronic versions of those theses accessed on an internal network drive. So they're not publicly available, but they're available internally. So this got me in touch with the CMC after a delay. Thank you, Chantry, for being patient. The CMC, I learned, hasn't really gotten requests from Illinois libraries to create bibliographic records for electronic resources, whether they're books or journals or streaming video. The CMC is working with the Illinois State Library because the Illinois State Library funds the CMC through a grant. The CMC is working with the State Library to develop an EResource policy for the Cataloging Maintenance Center. But in the meantime, that policy, they aren't sure of a timeline for when it will be ready. But in the meantime, the CMC said that they would be willing to make an OCLC record for an e-resource, but it needs to have a web accessible link in the 856 field at the bottom of the record. So that meant that the Blessing Health Professions theses weren't eligible since they were only accessed internally. And then the other thing is the e-resource that's being submitted to the Cataloging Maintenance Center, it needs to fit their scope of eligible collections. So it would need to be local history, genealogy, or special collections. What we suspect, I agree with Pam there at the CMC, I think a lot of these local digital materials, they're being put in a more appropriate platform like the Illinois Digital Archives, the Illinois Digital Heritage Hub, which is part of the Digital Public Library of America. Some libraries, I know Peoria, you're not heavily using it, but you have OCLC's Content DM. So she suspects, and I think she's right, that a lot of these local type of electronic resources are being put in a more appropriate platform versus MARC records being created for them. Kendall and I talked it over. We are willing, because I know the CMC understands RSA bibliographic descriptions as well, or I should say bibliographic standards, and they also understand the standards for the other consortia in Illinois. So Kendall and I talked it over and said that we would be willing to let the CMC make good quality OCLC bibliographic records for e-resources if they fall within that scope and they have an 856 link, mostly because we know that they probably won't have huge numbers of these, so it won't require a lot of time to monitor links to make sure the record is good. So these we think would just be in small quantities, especially since nobody has asked the CMC up to this point to even put them in. And then the other thing is, like I've already mentioned, we know that they understand basically the descriptive standards we need in our database and then also in OCLC. They do catalog at the fullest level at the CMC. They're not putting in some of the, as I call them, yucky records that are widespread in OCLC. But again, mostly we're doing this because these are very unique items. We recognize there's really no other way to make them available if you don't have a more appropriate platform like we talked about. And then we're counting on the size of these collections, just being a few items, not thousands upon thousands of records.
And they're not likely to go away, which is a big problem with e-resources, is that you get them cataloged and then the link changes and there's no tie point back to that MARC record to let the MARC record know that either the thing has gone away or the access point has changed. These types of items are probably created, put out there, and they just live on somebody's website forever and ever and never get changed or removed. So
yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Kendall. Yeah, I feel like they're a little bit more permanent maybe than some of the others. Okay, a couple other details about that. Again, the CMC with EResource records, even if they make an OCLC record and we go ahead and move forward with it, we still will not update your library's holdings in OCLC on that record. We have a process on the back end that excludes EResource records from the batch holding updates that we do, not every month, but I think 9 times a year at this point. So even if the CMC makes your record, we'll still make sure we're not putting it in OCLC. We'd hate to have you get an interlibrary loan request for it through WorldShare when it's something that clearly can't be lent out. Okay. And again, keeping in mind what we just said about the reasons why we would let the CMC do a bibliographic record for a local item. Remember, it's unique. not likely to go away, not a high quantity. If the CMC isn't able to catalog the item, and the blessing theses are a good example of this, because remember, they were accessed on an internal network drive. They weren't accessible on the web, which is one of the CMC criteria. We'll enter a brief record here at RSA, but it's going to have just enough description to make it searchable and display for your users, both in workflows and in the RSA CAT. So it'll have title, creator, a date, a couple subject headings, just to make it searchable. But again, the idea is we won't be doing a real robust record. And of course, it would have information about how to access it as well. So with the blessing theses, it would just be a simple note that it's accessed on an internal network drive. Okay, I'm gonna move forward. Yeah, those were all the details I had about the CMC records. Does anyone have any questions? I'm interested, especially if anybody who's attending, if you think that you might have a need for something that's a local history, genealogy, special collections item that's electronic, if you think you might have a need of the CMC's help for that.
No comments so far.
Okay. Still good to know, and we'll put a section in the policy about this. That way we're on the same page going forward. Okay, the next suggestion was taking print book bibliographic records and then just putting the electronic book access link at the bottom of the book record. This was suggested by Jane at Galesburg. They had a batch of Salem Press ebooks. The vendor was only able to provide book records. We asked about ebook records, but they just had the regular print book records that they had added the ebook links at the bottom. We decided we wouldn't be loading those types of records into workflows because of a few reasons. We already had the print record in the database that was a good quality OCLC record, and we needed to keep, really in any case, we need to try and keep your print holdings attached to OCLC records whenever possible, as well as your AV holdings. I should say your physical item holdings. We need to keep them attached to OCLC records whenever possible, because remember, that's powering the statewide catalog. We also, and this is something actually, Kendall, we were talking about this yesterday in more depth. Kendall, I think you had a good point that if there's other libraries that owned that book, we would then have duplicate records.
Yep, well, two ways you could go there. You could have duplicate records in that you'd have the ebook record on its own title, and then you'd have the physical record on its own title. But patrons, to make it show up in the catalog, there has to be a physical item loaded against that ebook record, and it has to be at least one physical, well,
it's like a dummy item.
Yeah, one dummy item per library that's attached to that ebook link, and it starts looking like we have lots and lots and lots of copies of these ebook items, and it gets real confusing to patrons because they're not really paying attention. This is part of the reason why we took ADML out of the catalog way back in the day, because it looked like we had 96 copies of everything in ADML, and patrons did not understand why they could see 96 copies were available in the catalog and then couldn't get at that record, or if they did get to the record, they were on hold for 4 months waiting for the item to clear up. And the other thing we found was that those vendor links, they do not stick around for long. Vendors love to change their linking codes. They like to redo their websites. They add extra layers of security. And the second they do that, that record is now dead, but we have no way of knowing that the record is dead because the link stopped working. It ends up making the database cluttered and messy and immediately out of date. Any library system on the market today right now does not really support ebooks well at all. Universities pay lots and lots of money for content management solutions that do deal with ebooks. And unfortunately, the way that the current library systems work, they just don't support ebooks well. There's not that integrated built-in link checking and all of that. The accommodations made so that you can have separate linking per library, but not make it display like it's 100 items or whatever. So I cringe every time we add an ebook as a MARC record because I know it's confusing people, and I know that that link is going to be not useful 6 months to a year down the road when something on the internet changes. And then now you have to start factoring in the cleanup time and all of that for how do we know the link is bad? Well, we generally don't know until a patron tells us, and then that opens the whole, well, all of the links for this vendor bad? How do we find these records and check them all? And then we have to remove them, and yeah, it's not fun.
Like Kendall said, these print books, so with the ebook records on them, or the ebook links at the bottom of the print book records, to us, that would make it sound like, too, not only are there duplicates, but it would kind of be like the DVD and Blu-ray records where people are attaching multiple item types to the same record. There's more patron confusion if you've got both the book and the ebook on the same record. I think that could potentially be real confusing. And the last thing, it would just take too much energy and time on our end to convert an ebook record to convert a print book record to an ebook record. It would just take too much on our end, and then to try and document it and pass it over to another member of the team here to do. It wouldn't be sustainable doing it that way, both the patron and then from our perspective. Okay, any questions about that one before we go to the third question here on the agenda? This one. Okay. This one, the electronic resource collections, considering cataloging them with MARC records if they're held by 2 or more libraries, whether they're Big 13 or not. This was suggested by Beth at William Evans Library District there in Princeville for the World Book Online. And Beth and I actually had a good chat yesterday. She was here for the RSA Reports Committee meeting, so I snagged her, kind of gave her a preview of what we're recommending for this. But we like to see you use your strength in numbers, especially if you know of other libraries in the area that are going to be subscribing to the same e-content package as you. We like to see you as you're getting ready to buy, subscribe to these packages to push your vendor and say, look, Cerseidynex, our database vendor, they have a platform called Electronic Resource Central, EResource Central, that can integrate the content from e-resources into our online catalog without MARC records. I know we've talked about ERC at previous meetings. Remember, that's the one, like Kendall just typed in. Right now it shows Overdrive, ADML, and then Baker and Taylor, eRead Illinois books. Does it do BiblioBoard too?
I don't have it turned on for all the libraries. BiblioBoard is visible on the RSA website if you do a search, but I haven't pushed it out to anybody else yet.
Okay. That one, though, is compatible with ERC. And then it sounds like Hoopla is in the works as well.
Yes.
Okay. So what we were thinking is, we know some vendors won't want to participate with Cerseidynex and work on ERC configuration, but we think it doesn't hurt for you to ask, because like Beth, you and I talked about, some vendors may not even know Cerseidynex has this. And I think, Kendall, you had a good point that if they work with Cerseidynex to develop this, it's a set of applications that can be used by the vendor with other automation systems. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. So the way it works is the vendor themselves creates what's called an API to access their collections. And there's kind of a standardized set of, this is how you describe titles, this is how you describe authors, this is how you describe availability information, all of the things that not just Cerseidynex needs to be able to display an ebook and allow you to link to it to check it out, but basically any library vendor's catalog product. So like Overdrive was one of the first to jump on this because they realized real quickly, hey, we can write one set of additional code, put it on our website, and then every library system, it would be up to that vendor to then support what Overdrive made available. And because it's an open source standard, any of the ebook vendors can just write a set of APIs, put it out there, and then the library automation system vendors can then support it. So it's not like you're asking them to only work with Cerseidynex. What they make it work for one, it'll basically work for any of the library vendors who are willing to put in a little bit of time to convert that particular vendor's APIs to appear correctly in their catalog.
Mm-hmm. If you learn from the vendor that they are willing to set this up with Cerseidynex, we plan to put in the policy. There is a specific staff member at Cerseidynex, but you also said, Kendall, there's a page on the Cerseidynex site where a vendor basically could get started with Cerseidynex.
There's a vendor interface portal on the Cerseidynex website.
If that connection can be set up, since this isn't, well, actually, this is a part that's changed. You said, Kendall, the price of ERC is going up, correct?
Yeah, so RSA was actually one of the first, if not the first large consortia to have ERC with Overdrive actually up and running. And we have been paying basically peanuts to have this working. It has, over the years, has gotten far more expensive for the library automation system vendors to support as the size of the ebook or EResource collections has grown. So when we went live with Overdrive, I think we had 3,500 total titles. In ADML, it was like 3,500 or 4,500 titles. And so data-wise, that's not a lot. Hoopla has something like 26 million titles that are all available via ERC, and that puts a significant strain on the back end. So Cerseidynex and the other library system vendors have started changing their pricing on supporting these things. And unfortunately, it's kind of making it a little more difficult in RSA's case to say, oh, I want to get a new ERC connector, and RSA will pay for it when it's $100 to $200 to $300 per library. We have 145 members, and 145 times 3 is not budgetable. So, well, 300. So yeah, we may have to start doing things like saying we can support your Hoopla collection, we can support your Canopy collection, because I believe Canopy is on the list of ERC vendors as well, if I remember correctly. But we may have to start passing those costs along to libraries. At some point in time, it doesn't make sense for us to eat the cost of a product when the cost of all the products combined that we're eating is more than what a library is paying in their membership fees. So as you can imagine, that makes things difficult. Now, the upside of ERC is that the way this is set up, these records are not in our database, our Symphony database, and they are refreshed far more often. So when a vendor adds an item to their collection, the next time ERC does a sync with that vendor, that item is added automatically into the collection. Supposedly, when the item is deleted out of your collection, that information is also, for most vendors anyway, passed along, and the items are automatically taken out. If the vendor changes their authentication process or their download process or any of that other information, that also gets automatically updated via that ERC process. And that all happens up in the cloud and is indexed and made available in our catalog, but without having to dump all of those individual records into our database. And if you've done extensive searching for ebooks, you'll notice that vendors' metadata varies wildly in how useful it is. Some of them are okay, and you can find things, and others, it's a title and an author, and that's really about it. So the quality of these records, while is not in our database, which is good because sometimes they're not great records.
If you do get, though, like what you, Beth, were saying, there's several of you thinking about subscribing to the same thing. And again, if we can push for an ERC connector, the libraries that are subscribing to that e-content can split the cost of the ERC. So it does work to your advantage to talk to your neighboring libraries. Because like Kendall said, the MARC records are not the way to approach this, but ERC is. It really is the way to go forward, but we realize the cost is high, but I'm thinking if you can try to work together, that might help make the cost more doable for those of you participating.
And one other thing I'll mention is that we are not the only consortia that is grappling with this issue of how do we support increasingly large ebook online and joint and physical items. Every consortia and standalone library really is faced with these same decisions on how do we support this, what works for us. And everybody's looking for different ways to make this work. So at the end of the month, the annual Cerseidynex Users Group Conference is happening in Minneapolis. And one of the things that's on my list of things to talk to people about is how other large consortia are dealing with ebooks, and if anybody is developing different processes to deal with them, to make, so that we don't have to try and make MARC records for everything and confuse patrons, but still be able to display them. So that's on my list of things to do, to see if anybody's developed any kind of wonderful new thing that potentially could be helpful to us. I don't know if there's anything out there that would work for RSA, but there are people all over the place looking at this, including Cerseidynex. They're trying to figure out better ways to support this as well. So I'm looking forward to see if there's anything new out there that will make this easier to support and yet still be able to do what I know some of you would like to do, and allow your patrons to have easier access to ERC materials, or at least display them so they're searchable. I think what we found is that even though you can download an item from the RSA catalog, in reality, once a patron has either Overdrive or eRead Illinois or BiblioCommons, they have an app on their phone. Once they know that the title is out in the system, they go to the app and they download it from the app. And the end of month numbers that I run every month definitely show that. We had 21,000 some odd circs in ERC for ADML in January. 7,300 of those were done through the Libby app, and only 530 came via API, which is either RSA CAT or some other tie-in method, third-party tie-in method. So there's, you know, a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of people are actually in RSA CAT and clicking on the download link and opening it on their computer and reading it. So display is important. Access is, if there's an app, access is generally going through that app. I jumped ahead, but.
No, I feel like all of these details, they do interconnect, and it was somewhat tricky to put together this agenda because I feel like it is a blur of like you said, we understand these need to be discoverable for patrons, but we need a way that's more sustainable to do this, and in a way that makes sure your collection is being kept updated and not becoming stale with broken links and having bad description. Let me just look and see here. This is a change, though, from what we had talked about in that first draft of the policy. I might pull that up here on the screen. I know when we did the first draft back in September, we said that ERC would only be for the big 13 libraries, but we are willing to open that up to any library of any size. And again, we'd like to see you band together if you're buying the same EResource packages. So where it talks about the non-big 13s, this will be revised to indicate that ERC is an option. We still will not put MARC records here, though, because remember, that's really not the way forward to do this. We will keep the MARC records for the big 13s, but if MARC records are done for big 13s, it will only be because there is no ERC connector available. So that's something that probably needs to be clarified a little bit more in here.
We also probably need to put a number limit on that because, you know, if somebody buys something like Canopy or Hoopla that has hundreds of thousands to millions of records,
there needs to be, yeah,
we can't manually touch every one of those.
Well, that's actually a good point, because I feel like here at RSA, especially as new members come on board and we're trying to encourage members to report physical items to us, like many of you in the meeting have been doing a good job of telling us about the bad encoding levels, things that need improvement, things you can't find records for. To us, really, the focus needs to stay on the physical items. So I think, Kendall, that's a good point, that we need to talk about a number there in terms of when we would do MARC records, because it really, it can't mushroom. The other thing I too am worried about, and I know we put this at some point here, even in this draft of the policy, but we only have a limited number of how many bibliographic records we can have in our system. It's 1.5 million. And this was written back in August, September. At that point, we were already at 1.11 million. So to us too, like you're saying, Kendall, the focus has to be on the physical items, because if we load thousands of these EResource records, that's going to eat into our limit for the total bib records we can have for all formats of materials. Yeah, let me make a note of that.
And just to give you an idea, when we removed the ADML records out of the system, I think at that point in time we had about 6,500 ADML titles, but we removed, item-wise, we removed about 850,000 items from the system when we deleted those ADML records. And it took us almost 2 weeks of, we delete X number today, the overnight process works through them. We can't delete too many because then that pushes back morning reports because the overnight processes take too long. So One MARC record in that case was effectively about 100, a little over 100 actual physical copies when you added in Advantage collections. So it was eye-opening to us. We did not realize that was, we're like, oh, it's 6,500 records, we can delete that. And then we went and ran a report and went, oh, no, we can't. This is almost a million items. This is a much larger project than we thought.
Just looking here. Before we leave that agenda item, does anyone have any comments about that? But it probably feels like at this meeting we're telling you a lot of what you can't do, but we're trying to encourage ERC. And like Kendall said, that's our homework for the upcoming Cerseidynex conference, is to see, to me, there has to be a way to do this, to make this ideally not quite as expensive and doable, but I don't know, like you said, what's out there besides what we know from our end.
We're desperately looking for a way to support this in a manner that A, is affordable, and B, does not mean that I have to devote a staff person to do this and nothing else. And also preferably another way to do this so that the records get refreshed on a regular basis, so that we know that link changes and added and deleted items are being reflected.
To my knowledge, and this is again just what I learned there was a retreat last November with different staff from the other Illinois consortia. A lot of the other consortia in the state, they do not load any MARC records for EResources. I know Swan, which is also Cerseidynex, they're trying to heavily use ERC as well. They actually have somebody, I think, there that's a lot of what they do is maintaining that. Yep. Robin is her name. So I think other consortia, even here in the state, they're unsure what to do. And they're just not doing the MARC records in general. Okay, so I thought what we would do then is, I found a video. It's about 3.5 minutes long. It does a good job just explaining ERC as an overview. And then I'd like to show you where we have the ERC fact sheet, as Cerseidynex calls it, excuse me, that lists the different vendors that are currently compatible, ones that they're working with, ones that may be potential collaborators. I wanted to show you where that's posted. So we'll do the video here.
And those of you, somebody online, when the video starts and the sound starts, if you could let us know if you can hear the sound, that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Ben Seiler at Cerseidynex. Let's get started. In this video, we'll talk about ERC. ERC, or EResource Central, is an electronic resource management tool. It lets you manage all of your ebooks, recordings, and other electronic resources. ERC saves your library time by eliminating wasted effort. Currently, libraries have to visit multiple vendor sites to manage their electronic content. At each of these sites, there's new login information, new interfaces, and more chances to get bogged down. Once you're done with the vendor sites, you have to gather your title's MARC records and load them into your ILS. The records your vendors provide are all different, and your library staff has to clean them up. After you've done that, your library users can access your content. Well, they can access it if they can figure out how to navigate all the different vendors' download pages. Simple enough until you realize how many different vendor records your library has to process each week. Cleaning up MARC records consumes staff time and effort that could be spent on your collection and your community. Pretty soon, it gets hard to keep up. EResource Central simplifies your entire electronic resource workflow. You manage all your vendors and titles in one interface, and you skip the entire process of loading and cleaning MARC records. ERC works with 8 different content vendors with more on the way, so you can keep the vendor relationships you already have. In addition, ERC gives your library users easy access to resources through your catalog. Your users can check availability, log in, and download resources without ever leaving your catalog. They don't have to understand the differences between vendors just to download an ebook. Let's take a look at just how easy electronic content is with ERC. We'll walk through the entire EResource delivery process, from vendor to download, in the ERC interface. We'd like to thank Frisco Public Library, one of our earliest partners, for letting us use their interface. First, notice I have all my vendors here, in one place. From Overdrive to Baker & Taylor and Recorded Books, you control all your resources in one place, ERC. This saves you time, because you don't have to go to different vendor sites to get the content you need. With powerful searching and cross-vendor faceting, you can find all the content you want quickly and easily. Once you've collected the titles you want, you can send them to your catalog. Just click Sync. It's that easy. Your titles are on their way to your catalog. You don't have to worry about vendor mark records, cataloging cleanup, or anything else. Just click and you're done. Once you've sent your ERC titles to the catalog, your library users can search them next to your physical titles. We'll take a look at ERC working along with Frisco's Enterprise instance. I'll search for some of the titles in Frisco's ERC collection. When I find an item I want, I can check availability right from the catalog. If it's available, I can download the item. After I log in, the title downloads automatically to my e-reader application. That's it. It's that easy. ERC simplifies your entire electronic content workflow. Find out how you can eliminate multiple visits to vendor sites, dirty mark data, and library user confusion on how to download e-resources. Talk to your Cerseidynex sales rep today to learn what else ERC can do for you.
I'm in a black hole. How do I get out of the hole? There we go. Okay. It was a very dark hole. That hopefully gave you just a good overview of how easy it is to synchronize the content, to really make it still accessible, but not have the step of, like it says, the dirty mark records. So I do think on your end, the next step is if you're working with a vendor, thinking about subscribing to EResources, your next step would be to encourage that vendor to work with Cersei. It is helpful though, like I mentioned before the video, to know which vendors are currently working with Cersei and which ones are potentials. So here on the database page at the bottom, we have, this is updated just of January, CerseidyneX's EResource Central fact sheet. It is a longer document. I wanted to point out the most important page on here, page 9. Yeah, here it is. Pages 9 and 10 show you the vendors that are currently available in ERC. Notice there's Baker & Taylor, Biblioboard, there's Hoopla, there's Overdrive. They don't have anyone in beta, but they do have a few in development, planned, and then potential.
I wonder why not see Canopy. I could have sworn they.
Yeah, you said Canopy, Kendall, and I thought maybe they're under one of these other ones is what I thought.
I could have sworn Canopy, they were working with Canopy.
Yeah, Cerseidynex does periodically update this. We think at least a few times a year. The rest of the document just explains for each of these vendors the features in ERC that it has available. Let's get a vendor we're more familiar with. So here's Baker & Taylor, which would be our e-read. So it's telling you the supported features. Yeah, this is the one that is so important. Auto remove delicensed titles. Importing the metadata so that when users are looking at it, searching for it in the online catalog, they can find it. You need to log in using your library card information. You can do the download, place hold. So it's a similar format in the rest of this document for each of those vendors that is currently available with Cerseidynex. They have similar charts where it lists the features. So it looks like it's a big unwieldy document, but just remember pages 9 and 10, and then the rest of the pages have the features that are supported. Something that I think is important to mention, I know you and I, Kendall, talked about this yesterday, but I don't think we've mentioned it today. We mentioned the cost of ERC is going up because of the cost on CerseidyneX's end to maintain all of the content, but each of these vendors, the price is different depending on the size of your collection, those different features that are available that the last half of this document talks about. So we can't give you just a flat price for how much this would cost. And remember, if you can split it with other libraries that are subscribing to the same thing, then that could also bring a price break as you split the cost. So the main thing is when you're thinking about subscribing to something, check with the vendor, check this document. And then if they are on this document, contact Kendall and he will work with you as well as Cerseidynex to figure out what the cost would be. But like Kendall said, the mark record option, that will stay with the big 13s, but we will need to think about a limit as to how many of those records we will bring in, just so that we can be mindful of continuing our focus on the physical items and not eating up database space. With lots of EResource records. Okay, let me just look and see here in my notes. I think I've covered just about everything. Yeah, any questions at this point before we talk about the next steps for this policy? Okay, so what I was thinking for next steps, and
We got a question.
oh, you got a question.
Will I be checking with Canopy? So if you're set up and running with Canopy, there's two pieces to any of this. So for instance, Hoopla or Canopy or ADML or whatever, there's a couple things. So the step one is your library signing up with the vendor, and then the vendor, as part of that sign up process, contacts RSA to get access to our database so that they can authenticate your patrons. That stuff works with Canopy and everybody else, basically, in most cases. So Canopy is up and running in lots of libraries in RSA. Then the next piece is, has the vendor, Canopy in this case, worked with Cerseidynex and the other library automation vendors to make their back-end databases and the records that you are authorized to see available via that ERC string. And apparently, either Canopy has got another name that I just did not recognize from the list, or I misheard that. Or maybe when I was talking with the Canopy rep, they said they were thinking about doing it. But eventually, if let's say Canopy does show up on this list and they're ready to go, then what would happen is we would have to find out what the price is, and the price is vary wildly. We got a Biblio board for all the libraries in RSA, and it was like $2,000. But for all the libraries in RSA to have access to Hoopla is like $120,000. That's the ERC cost. That's not the library cost to work with Hoopla. That's how much it costs to host the Hoopla's database on the back end. And clearly that would be unaffordable. So it just depends. I have no idea what the pricing is going to be until Cerseidynex and the automation vendor let us know what that's going to be. So Beth says, how does a vendor get a hold of Cerseidynex to become an ERC vendor? So they can go out on the Cersei website. They can look there. The guy who runs the entire project, essentially. That guy's name is Doug Peterson. But on screen there is the easier, better way to do it, because that way it will get routed to the right people. I don't have access to it, but as a vendor, you can also, Cersei's got a whole kind of support site for vendors where they can log in, and then they have access to all the technical documentation and that kind of thing. So probably their best bet is to either call Cersei with the numbers on screen or send them an email and just specify in there that they are interested in making their ebook collection work with the public catalog. They don't even need to know what the product is. Cersei will know what they need to do once they contact them.
Any other questions? That's a good one. I think it would be safest just to start here, and then they can direct the vendor once they hear from them to the appropriate person.
Yeah.
I feel like not anything against Cerseidynex. This happens with all vendors, but they change staff around who does what there. So we'd hate to give you a specific person, even though it is Doug Peterson right now.
Yeah. And the other thing to remember is that there are several setups when you're talking about e-things. Just your library buying the product and getting access to it, that's one set of setup things. And generally that works with almost any vendor, because SIP2 is a regular standard that everybody understands. We just set up a SIP connection for a library this week that had bought a new database and wanted to authenticate their patrons. So that piece is separate from the piece of actually using a product to get those materials to display in the catalog. So there's no cost when you sign up for Canopy or Hoopla or whatever. For us to set up the SIP port and do the authentication, we have an unlimited SIP license. So just setting up the authentication piece so your patrons can get to the vendor website, authenticate and log in, that part's free and not a big deal in almost all cases. It's the harder part is when you're talking about actually extracting that entire database and trying to display it inside of an RSA product versus just the fact of
connecting.
Yeah, just connecting to it and authenticating that you are a patron and you are from the right library and should have access to the collection.
Okay, so in terms of next steps, some of these we've talked about already, but remember the idea is to revise the policy to reflect today's discussion, sharing it on the listserv before the May 9th database meeting. At that May 9th meeting, remember, we'll talk about the revisions, review them, and then I'd like to try and get approval on this policy. If we don't feel ready to approve it in May, then we'll present it at the September 12th database meeting. And then depending on when the database approves it, it will go to the RSA Board of Directors and the RSA Users Group after the database committee. We'd like the database committee, though, you as members to really have the first approval, because this affects bibliographic access. But we also know too, though, we need the board and the users group because they are the ones that have the ultimate say, and then it's your libraries too if you're not that person already, but the directors and the managers are the ones that decide what you're subscribing to. Yeah. Okay, and I do think this was a suggestion from Beth when we talked yesterday. I think it's a good one. I think that our last step will be once we have this approved, we'd like to encourage the people at Rails, Burr Ridge that are doing group purchases. We'd like to encourage them when RSA members are buying e-resources. We'd like to encourage them to have the RSA library contact us so we can explain the part about electronic access of this content. We'd hate for somebody to subscribe to something and think, well, just because it has MARC records, we can go ahead and have it accessible. So we'd like to work with that person so that if they know that one of you are going to be subscribing to something, they can nudge you in our direction if you're thinking that you want that content accessible in our online catalog.
And the other reason to do that is so that we know that you are going to need authentication
Sure.
set up for that. What happens, I don't want to say frequently, but several times a year, is that a vendor will be trying to set up a product that a library bought, be that a hardware product or a access to a database of some type, and the vendor has scheduled a day to install it and configure it and make sure that all works. And we don't know anything about it until that day, but it takes an overnight process to set up a SIP port in most cases. So, you know, they call us and they say, hey, how do we connect to your system? And I go, well, I can send you the information and you can start testing it tomorrow. But the library and the vendor is trying to get it all set up and configured today because that's the day that they had scheduled. So we need to be in the loop a little bit sooner. So if you are buying something through Rails or anyone else that is going to need patron authentication, if you let James or I know ahead of time so that we can at least prepare a SIP port for you so that we could get you working on that day. We also have to add exceptions into the firewall, so we need to know the vendor's IP address range and things like that. That happens far more often than I would like it to, and it's not that, you know, oh, I'm surprised and I don't want to do the work. It's the fact that the vendor has picked a day to do the install for you, but they hit a brick wall when they try and do the connection. And there's nothing we can do. It takes an overnight process to finish the configuration on our system. And so then the vendor gets pushed back a day, and sometimes that means it's a week or more before they can reschedule the rest of the installation for the particular library. So we'd like to reduce the possibility of that happening, if humanly possible.
That's something we can put in the revised policy. I know I had just talked about that as a next step, but I think that's something that wouldn't hurt to have in writing somewhere. So that's a good detail. Okay, that takes us to Liza again. If anyone has any final questions, if not, Liza will tell us about next meeting.
If no questions, then our next RSA database committee meeting in person will be Thursday, May 9th from 9:30 to 12 at RSA East Peoria, I'm assuming, and also virtually.
And I do have the links posted to register, so if you know that day works, go ahead and register if you know it works for you.
Otherwise,
One other note I'll put out there. If you have signed up for RSA Day, but you know you're not going to be able to attend, we have a waiting list for people to get signed up to RSA Day. So as soon as you find out that you're not going to be able to attend RSA Day, or someone in your library, as soon as they find out that maybe they're not going to be able to attend RSA Day, if you could either open up the email that you got from L2 and cancel your registration, or you can go out to the event in L2 and cancel your registration, or you can send an email to the help desk and we can cancel your reservation. That would be appreciated because we have, as of yesterday, I think 7 people still on the wait list that would like to attend RSA Day, but we just ran out of physical space to hold people. So I did add 4 people from the wait list yesterday. Hopefully they got an email telling them that they had been added. But if you know that you're not going to be able to attend specifically RSA Day, that would be great if you'd let us know, because there are other people who would like to go and we would need to get them added to the list.
okay, and if that's all, then we shall adjourn this meeting.
Thank you so much. We hope to see you in May.